Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of Dr. Muhammad Al Ali and Trends Research and Advisory, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Saeed Al Dhahri, the Director of the Center for Future Studies at the University of Dubai. Dr. Saeed is a former member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the UAE Space Agency and a former advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs on Information Technology. He's now a member of the Global Future Council of the World Economic Forum and a member of the WEF Metaverse Governance Community. Responsible AI is designed and deployed with the good intentions of empowering businesses and employees while fairly impacting customers and societies. It brings unprecedented opportunities but also incredible responsibilities. However, many concerns regarding privacy, inequality, bias, and safety arise when discussing AI. Dr. Saeed will now present the ongoing challenges that AI present while foreseeing the future of responsible AI.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Moza, for the introduction, and you kind of summarized my talk, which is excellent. I'm really very happy to be here with you here at Trends Advisory and Research Institute, think tank, independent think tank here in Abu Dhabi. And I will be speaking about this topic, the future of responsible AI. So now I think it becomes important for governments and for organizations to look beyond, just implementing, AI, as we saw the hype, that started a while ago, many years back. And I was one of the pioneers in this area when I did my master's research in George Washington University. This was in 1988. And my topic at that time, can you hear me? Yes, okay. And my topic at that time was to use neural networks at that time, the backpropagation algorithm, to classify acute ischemic heart disease, basically the heart attack. So I had to work then at the New England Medical Center in Boston to collect the data for patients who visited the hospital, suffering or complaining of chest pains and so forth, and then to train the network to be able to predict heart attack. So I collected around 20,000 data, built a small neural network, three-layer backpropagation then, and trained it on an IBM PC-80. This was in 1988, and it took almost 2 days for the network to finish its training and conversion. I had to wait for 48 hours, for training. But technology has advanced so fast since then. Algorithms were improved, the technology, the computing power improved, and now we live in the age of big data. So this is what really feeds the AI. I think the question is on the table today is that how we can implement AI responsibly. What I mean by responsibly is that to make sure that the outcome of the algorithms or AI is unbiased, is unfair, is fair, is based on human values, and also how societies can trust this technology. As we will see in a while, there were a lot of mishaps and failures into the practice of AI. So hopefully that we can raise concerns among policymakers, among governments, among researchers, that this topic is not just only about data science. Data science plays an important part of it, but also is a collaborative work that involves many people, from governance, from ethics, from compliance, from the risk department. Even the CEO of the organization need to make sure that whatever products the company or the organization is developing is based on those principles, on some principles. We want to make sure that we can apply those principles on the technology itself. So we live in a world where algorithms becomes invisible in our life. They control who's granted loans. They control sentencing and bailing people from prison or courts. They also control who goes to college and what college, you know. They also been involved in scoring exams, screening candidates, you name it, hiring processes, recommending promotions, social care cases, deciding on the social care, welfare entitlement, and so forth. They also recommend for us what to read and what to watch when you go into Netflix or when you go to buy from Amazon. They also do translation now with the Google translation and AI translation. You can it eliminates the language barrier. I happened to be visiting China a few years back, and of course I don't speak Chinese. The Chinese don't speak English, so I had to communicate with them with the Google Translator. I speak in English, translated into Chinese. They speak in Chinese, translated in English, and this is how you communicate. So it promises to eliminate the barriers of communication. Driving cars, of course, with self-driving cars, predicting crimes, making money in terms of investment, algorithmic trading, diagnosing medical images, suggesting treatment plan. And now we see even AI is being used also in creative works, painting, playing music. So when we ask ourselves where AI has not been used, you will see that it's gonna invade our lives in every corner of our lives. Whether we like it or not, algorithms are going to be there, are going to be invisible, are going to make important decisions. So how we can make sure that those decisions are accurate, how we can explain the decision that made by those algorithms, whether for audit purpose or if someone, the researcher, wants to improve his model. So he needs to understand how the model reaches into a conclusion, or how model reaches into a prediction. And that is too difficult today with neural networks, with deep learning. So the issues of AI can eliminate or amplify human bias, and we've seen, as we will see shortly, some of the cases that I will highlight. There's also, it raises a legal and ethical concern about the outcome, about the predictions made by AI. It also brings security issues in terms of how we can ensure the security of those systems. And we ask a question, are they really an improvement on human systems that they replace? They're supposed to replace the decision making, or they're supposed to help humans or augment humans' capability with the decision making process? So are they really a good replacement, or are they really a good augmenting technology when it comes to this? And I like this quote. I quote this Abid Naskar when he says that artificial intelligence will not destroy the world. Our irresponsibility will destroy the world. It's the irresponsibility of people who is building and deploying AI that will really make a difference. How is to ensure that we collectively build this technology responsibly? And I quote also IBM saying that building trustworthy and responsible artificial intelligence is perceived as a strategic differentiator for organizations. This is what's gonna differentiate organizations from one another. How you build this technology in a trustworthy manner, and how you deploy it responsibly, to the society. Let's look at some of the failures, on this technology for the past few years. You look into IBM Watson supercomputers, recommended unsafe and incorrect cancer treatment. This was from an internal document shows. So are we going to really rely on this technology to make decisions, clinical decisions for doctors? We got to think twice about it. Amazon face recognition falsely matched 28 members of the Congress with mugshots. Congress members being flagged as criminals. AI denied social security benefits to people with disabilities. So these are some of the cases. Uber self-driving car accident. Did AI fail us? You know that this accident happened in 2018, where an Uber self-driving car was moving in Arizona, okay, and there was a driver, there was a lady who's in the front seat of the self-driving car, but that lady was playing with her phone, watching YouTube. And what happened is that there was a lady, okay, passing the street, okay, with her bike. She's not on the bike, she is holding the bike and wants to cross the street. And she was hit by the self-driving car. So whose responsibility? Okay, it's the responsibility of the lady, of course, the driver, because no matter, it's there is always we can put a blame on someone, and the driver, because of course she was not responsibly driving and she was busy. But at the same time, this car was supposed to be a self-driving car. The car was supposed to be identified, correctly identify the person and the brakes at the right time. But the auto-driving system in the car could not identify, could not, detect that there is a person walking, or if it happened very late and could not detect the path of this person, where this person is going to move. So the responsibility here, yes, the blame after the investigation was put on the lady because she was careless and she was not paying attention to the road, but also the technology failed us, failed the lady. So this is when, look at also Microsoft, removed an emotion detecting tools from Azure. We claim that yes, AI can predict your emotion. AI can know when you are happy or unhappy. Based on what? Based on your facial expression. Look, there is an article that came out in the Atlantic, which which explained the false claims of this technology of AI to look at the facial expression and decide whether people are happy or unhappy. And I can I can fool the system. Yes, I can fool the system with my facial expression. A very strong case with the Dutch government. This was in 21. The whole government resigned because of an AI system that used to decide who to give child support to for the families who have newborn babies. Okay, and it happens over time that the algorithm learned, the bias and started to categorize people on their ethnic, on their color, on their nationality, and decide, who to give social welfare. And they could not detect this until years later, until 3-4 years later. So where is human oversight on this? Okay, and this has led, the Danish government to resign. So we can see that these mishaps or these failures can reach to the top in government. And if there is no regulations, no policies, no human oversight, no principles or no frameworks that can really put those practices into responsibility, then we will see many of this. Okay, look at, just recently, Meta also was asked to remove their algorithm that decides who to display housing advertisement to on Facebook. And the algorithm happened to be biased, again, based on race, based on family status, and it shows certain housing advertisement to some people, and it prevents those advertisements from shown to other people. Facebook was fined, or Meta was fined $115,000 for that. These are just some of the cases. Look at the statistics here. More than 1,200 publicly reported cases of AI failures over just 3 years. This is from the Center for Security and Emerging Technology and Partnership on AI at Georgetown University. This report was released in 2020. More than 1,200 publicly reported cases of AI failures. And the World Economic Forum, the 2022 Global Risk Perception Survey of the World Economic Forum says that only 10% have an established risk mitigation effort. Imagine 10% of the organizations worldwide have established risk mitigation efforts, while out of those 10%, 1% is effective, that they have an effective risk mitigation plan. What about the 99%? So this really brings the question, to the table of policymakers, to the table of on top officials and the leaders of the government. Less than 20% of respondents in a survey made by the IBM Institute for Business Value, who studies AI ethics, less than 20% of respondents strongly agree that their organization's practices, actions matched their stated principles. They might have principles or ethical principles, but are those principles really practiced and put in action? That is a question. Only less than 20% of the organizations who claim that they have ethical AI principles, that they have ethical AI frameworks, only less than 20% of them who practice this. So there is this, what's called intention-action gap. What's our intention? Is yes, we want to have a responsible and trustworthy AI, and we put frameworks and we put principles in place, but are those principles and frameworks really practiced to make sure that the outcomes, are we getting the right outcomes? So, and this has a big impact on society, of course. Discrimination, and it could be life-threatening, for the Watson case, when it's giving wrong recommendation treatment plan, it could be life-threatening. You could kill a person if the AI comes and give us a wrong recommendation, or if an AI falsely, detect someone with, for example, certain based on image classification that wrongly gives a wrong diagnosis. So we need to look more into those false negatives, or false positives, the sensitivity of the AI system. Losing the trust, of course, this will lead the society to lose the trust. If people see AI is doing this discrimination and the outcome of AI is not accurate and not true, people will start losing trust. Trust in the system, trust in the companies, trust in the government, even like what we've seen with the Denmark. Impact on business, losing reputation, losing revenues, customers, employees, and legal fees. They could be, going to legal claims based on this. So, PwC says that the good news about AI's risks, that companies are aware of them, they are aware of the AI risks, but the bad news is that most are not actually mitigating them. And mitigating those risks requires more than just data scientists. It requires proper governance within organizations. So what are the challenges that we look in here? In trying to operationalize the AI ethical principles. Yes, one step is to have an ethical principles in place, to adopt ethical principles, and we say these are like the values of the company. Okay, you come into the organization and you see those values nicely laid on the walls, that these are our values. Are these values really practiced? So this requires a culture, it requires a mindset, a mind change, and believing what we value, practicing what we value. So when we look into this operationalizing the AI ethical principles, it comes to the governance is the first important thing, is that how we can put the right governance structure with the right people, with the right expertise, with the right talent to be able to govern this AI development from the whole AI life cycle, right? The talent that are in place. So like I said, we cannot leave this to data scientists. Data science is good, is to have the scientist who can work with the data, who can analyze the data, who can put the data into models, train the AI systems, but it's more than just data scientists. It's about risk and compliance people. It's about ethics, data ethics and AI ethics. It's about, collaboration between, the different stakeholders in the organization, to make sure that, the outcome or the AI system is producing, the right outcome. It's also about what are the regulations that are, and the world is still, since now AI just came within the past maybe 10 years, which became a hype, the governments are trying to put regulations for AI. And there's some examples. For example, the European Union, they came up with the AI Act, European Union AI Act, which is still not being enforced, which is still under study. And lately I heard that they're going to vote on it by the end of September, by the end of next month. Okay. Canada is also, they came up with the AI and data management regulation. So also standards and benchmarks. What are the standards that are in place today that really, put a good practice for AI? And of course, the tools. What are the tools that we have? We have still, since this science or since this area is still immature and developing, people and companies and startups are trying to bring the right tools that help the data scientist and help the governance of AI to make sure that AI systems are unbiased and AI systems are ethical. So there's coming up with these, explainable, what's called XAI, explainable AI tools. So this is the guideline which was developed and adopted by the European Union, the European Commission, Commission's high-level expert group in 2019, came up with these European ethics guidelines, and it talks about how to have, this is the framework for trustworthy AI. So trustworthy AI is about three things. Is about lawful AI, that AI needs to be abide with the policies and regulations of the government. AI need to be ethical, based on ethics, based on principles, and need to be practiced and exercised. And also AI need to be robust. We want to make sure that AI is reliable, is reproducible. The results are reliable and reproducible. So we're talking about four important principles here. Okay, respect for human autonomy. We need to have, human in the loop. We need AI to be human-based. We need to respect human values. Prevention of harm, fairness. We need to make sure that AI is fair. Okay, and explainability or explicability. We want to make sure that we can explain the result that comes, out of AI, whether it's deep learning or AI systems. We need for people to understand it, for us to have a trust in the system. We need to make sure how the AI has reached into its decisions. And there are 7 key requirements to operationalize those principles. Human agency and oversight. We need always, all the time, to put the human in the loop to make sure that, yes, the outcome has been reviewed, has been tested many times, and this supervision, general supervision from many people in the organizations, which might guarantee, a responsible AI. Technical robustness and safety. We need to make sure that the system is robust and safe, technically, from the security perspective, from the privacy perspective. We need to have a privacy and data governance structure to make sure that we work only with a high quality data. We will be surprised. I happened to give a presentation last week for the Jordan government. This was based on the relationship between the UAE and Jordan about the data governance. In the world, less than 3% of the data in the world are really high quality data. Imagine, less than 3%. So we work with 97% of data. Then you tell me that I'm going to build an AI system that accurately do this while there is a problem with the quality of the data? You need to look into that carefully. So most of the work that involves AI modeling and making algorithms, 60 to 80% of the work is on fixing the data. Just want to make sure that we have the right data in place, that the cleaning the data, they call it data cleaning. And that takes about 60%, 60 to 80% of the time of the data scientist. So, and now we live in an age of, like I said, of big data. How much data is collected per minutes? We reached into not exabyte, petabyte, exabyte, and you name it. Okay, so really becomes an important fairness. So societal and environmental well-being, we need to make sure that AI is respecting the well-being of people and the society in large, that it's good for the society. It's not something that we will bring into society and will create problems like we saw earlier. We need to put accountability. Who's accountable when there is a failure? The company who designed the algorithm, the user who used the algorithm, the people in the organization. So we need to have an accountability in place so that we can guarantee, the outcome, and this is part of the governance which I was talking about. And then we need also to have an assessment. We need to assess, how AI applications, how good those applications. So for example, when there is an application is going to decide on scoring exam, or decide on, let's say, sorting through CVs to pick up candidates, okay, for interviews. We need to make an assessment, a proper assessment, to make sure that the claim made by the company, made by the designer, we can verify. We call it verifiable claims. How you can verify that the AI system is fair? Based on what you're going to verify it. So we need to have those metrics in place to make sure that we can make those verifiable claims. So, this is one of the frameworks and principles which was developed and adopted by the European Union. Microsoft, IBM, Google, Meta, they have their own principles and frameworks, and governments also, they have principles and frameworks. Dubai in 2019, before the pandemic, Smart Dubai, or now Dubai Digital Authority, they came up also with the AI ethical principles and guidelines. Okay, so like I said, one step is to develop those guidelines and to have them in place. The next step is really to operationalize them, how we can put them into operations. So when we look into how we can build responsible AI at scale, how we can scale this trustworthy, responsible AI in practice. The first thing that we need to work on is to have a culture of trust, is really to embed the culture of trust in the organization. So when you see here why AI ethics requires a culture-driven approach, because you want to build the beliefs. People, what are the beliefs of the people in the organizations? What their perception of AI is AI something that we're gonna give to IT or the data science to develop, or it's a shared responsibility, it's a collective responsibility in the organization. It's about attitude. So building this, and this requires, this is a journey. It will not come in a day or so. They will say, okay, we are a responsible AI organization, or we are a data-driven. When we say data-driven, we focus on the data. We are driven by the data. We look into data ethics is something on the board table, the subject of data ethics and AI ethics. And also it's about defining what responsible AI means for the organization. So putting those principles or creating those principles and policies and practices that needs to be adopted. And what are from the risk mitigation plans, what are the plans that we have in place, to mitigate the risks for AI? It's also about building organization capabilities. Like I said, the proper governance, we need to have a diversified team within the governance. It's not just only the IT responsibility, but also it's risk and compliance. It's also, business units, responsibility. It's the CEO responsibility. So having those measures put in the governance structure which will be so effective in terms of governing, AI development. Third-party auditing involving, third-party auditing to come and audit our AI practices, or doing red team exercise. Okay, yes, you guys have developed something. I'm gonna bring another group to look into what you have developed and find if there is something, that needs to be addressed. It's about creating new roles. Like I said, data ethicist, for example. Data ethicist. I happened to take a course with the Open Data Institute just during the pandemic, 21, a 4-month course to be a facilitator in data ethics, professional facilitator in data ethics. And you go through use cases and you go through to understand what is data ethics, why data ethics is involved. Today, any project that will be involving the use of data, we need to look at it from an ethical perspective. Who is affected by this project? Is there any decisions will be based on data? How the data were collected? Is the data biased, unbiased? So we need to look into that, and this becomes now a specialty by itself, like I said, AI ethicist or data ethicist. So we need to have cross-functional collaboration, like I said, and we need to have the right tools in place. Risk assessment solutions, there are now some startups and companies are coming up with risk assessment solutions. Machine learning operations, this is look into the whole life cycle of the AI development from end to end. What are the tools that we can use in place to help me, for example, detect AI bias? I have a data and I want to make sure that my data is unbiased. So is there a tool that are available that will, let's say software tool, to help me make sure that my data is unbiased? And so now companies, you cannot imagine how much effort is put into this. There is a lot of landscape, or let's say, companies who's working in this. Explainable AI, like I said, the tools that will help us explain, how we want to make sure that AI is interpretable. We can interpret the results of AI. And we need to adopt a more holistic performance metrics. What are the metrics? We need to monitor the behavior, because as the system learns and as the system makes, predictions, of course, it changes learning. It's like when you say AI is like, is like human in terms of learning. The baby is always learning. We always learn. So also AI is always learn when it makes those decisions. So how over time we want to make sure that AI does not learn bad practices. Just recently, with Elon Musk, or what's the company? No, not Tesla, but they released a chatbot a few weeks ago, a few days ago. They released a chatbot. The first thing the chatbot was criticizing Elon Musk. So how is that possible? Because it learns from the internet. It goes to the data that's there on the internet. There is some good data, that there is some good views about Elon Musk, and there is bad news about Elon Musk. So it learns from there. So how we can make sure that, that there is an oversight when it comes to designing and developing those chatbots. So what are the metrics that we will be using, for example, to look into the safety, transparency? What are the metrics that will decide, yes, we reached into a, fairly transparent AI, or a robust AI? So we need to have a metric in place. So it becomes much harder now for the data scientist to really put those metrics in the design of algorithm to make sure that their AI models are interpretable, they are fair or unbiased, and so forth. And we need to embed AI ethics and accountability at all levels in the organizations. We need to encourage employees to do the right thing. We need to build this culture of trust. So you see what's happening now in the industry. When somebody, I mean, someone has claimed that Google, an engineer, you read the story, has claimed that AI became sentient. I don't know how we define sentient. يعني إدراك باللغة العربية. الذكاء الاصطناعي بدأ يدرك. ما معناه, what does it mean that AI becomes sentient? Is it the way when you talk to the AI and you cannot distinguish that you are talking to a human being, you are talking to a machine? This is the Turing test. When you reach to a level that you cannot say who's behind the screen, whether it's an AI or a human being, that's we say that, AI has passed the Turing test. But what does it mean to be sentient? Okay, Google has fired that engineer, okay, and it was a big case. And I don't know whether we have reached sentience yet, or are we going to reach the sentient in the future? Yes, we might see AI. I'm going to give a presentation just after tomorrow to a big company in the fashion industry. And I just went to this software that's available online tool, and you just ask. You just ask that now the AI can write essays for you, and you hear the student who has written his thesis based on an AI. So he used the tool to write his thesis. Now, is this ethical? Not ethical? Is this acceptable? Not acceptable? We see AI playing music, even creating a new symphony, and creating new chords, that has not been created before. So we're reaching into limits of AI where we see AI is being used in many creative works. So continuing on this, we need to have an ethics committee in place, always to review, any project that involves the data from the ethical perspective, that the ethics committee need to decide, on these tools. And we need to provide incentives and rewards for employee to do the right things. Doing the right things is not easy, especially when it comes, especially in the industry, in the technology industry, when there is a conflict between making money and between the values that are practiced in the organization. How you can incentivize people to feel safe, to work in the organization, to do the right thing. And are they going to be supported by the leadership team, or are they going to be fired when someone, find out that what he works on is not ethical? Okay? Important question. So where are we going with the future? I think this is important. We have given a landscape of some failures. We've seen how important it is to have an AI ethical principles and frameworks in place, but not just only this, but also to practice the AI ethics and principles and to have the right governance. So where is the future with the responsible AI is going? I think the most important thing is to have a foresight embedded in the core design principles when we're creating AI. What I mean by foresight is prepare for the unexpected impact of AI. We need to anticipate. We need to have, a proactive approach, a proactive mindset to anticipate what problems will come out of this deployment or of this software. How we can manage these problems from happening, and from how we can manage society, perspective into the use of these tools. So we need to have a mindful AI approach that is a more human focused, that's a more human centric. That's the important thing. We can see also now that there is a rise of AI and data ethics. Like I said, certification programs. I went through this, Open Data Institute in UK, the IEEE, and so many professional organizations. We've seen this as a specialization now. Data ethicist, AI ethicist, or AI ethics professional. People are specializing into this because, like I said, this becomes on the top level or in the boardroom discussion. Increasing availability of open source responsible AI toolboxes like machine learning operations, algorithmic impact assessment. Canada have released an assessment, an algorithmic impact assessment tool that assesses the use, of AI, how this is going to be used, who is going to be impacted by it, what stakeholders in the society, whether internally or externally, are going to be impacted, how they are going to be impacted. Is this tool safe? And you go through a checklist, a very comprehensive checklist to make an assessment, for the AI. And then we need to have a metrics in place, verifiable claims, how we can verify, the claims of the developer that the AI and so and so and so and so. And then the tools, like I said, DARPA, for example, the Department of Advanced Research Project Agency in the US, have worked for 4 years on a project called Explainable AI. And there is a lot of learning that they went through, and they brought some tools and recommendations how to practice explainable AI. We see also a rise in synthetic data. Now, if you don't have a high quality data in place, can you create synthetic data? And this becomes a question. And we see now organizations, if they don't have, when we say about what really makes a high quality data need to be diverse, representing the whole population, need to be complete, need to be up to date. So there is different multiple dimension for assessing high quality data. So if you don't have that high quality data in place to train the AI algorithm, can we create synthetic data? So we see now organizations are going into this, and Gartner says that 60% of all data used for AI will be synthetic by 2024. But what does it mean is really to train AI system on something not real? Just ask ourselves, what does it mean, synthetic data? That we created the data to make sure that the data is of high quality and to train the AI system with. So we need to think of this. And we see also that the use of both approaches, AI top-down approach and or the hybrid or the bottom-up approach. So we'll see a hybrid approach is top-down. By what I mean by top-down is a rule-based AI, versus this deep learning AI that trains on data. So we might see in the future the use of hybrid approach to AI development. Ethically driven society, we need to foster universal AI literacy, and that's important. An event like this, I see it as very important to educate and create the awareness for the people in the society at large that you need to be worried about the algorithm. Every one of us here in this room and whoever is watching this podcast today, on social media, need to be worried about the use of algorithm. And you have the question to go and ask the entity who used the algorithm, if you know that they're using algorithms, how fair and how good is your algorithm? If that algorithm is going to decide where to place your children in school, what schools are going to be, whether it's the government is using that algorithm, Ministry of Education, or whoever else is using the algorithm, you have the right to go and investigate. And you have the right to go and know whether that algorithm is right, because you never know. It might be discriminating. The result might not be accurate. The algorithm might over time build this bias and start discriminating and so forth. So having this AI literacy, I think, is one important. This was a recommendation actually by the World Economic Forum. So with the talent shortage, we have shortage in the number of data scientists in the world. So we will see, Gartner's estimating that by 2025, 50% of the data scientist activities will be automated by AI, easing the acute talent shortage. Some of the activities that is today done by the data scientist will be automated as well. We see also increasing global partnership. There is a global partnership on AI under the umbrella of OECD. Okay, the big tech, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, Google, you name it. They created an AI alliance as well for responsible AI. Okay, so we see many partnership, global partnership to address trustworthy and explainable AI. And last but not least is to have a social license for AI. What do I mean by a social license? Based on three things. Based on responsibility, that the AI to be responsible, and we want to make sure that we practice this responsibility in the development of AI. Based on value to the society, what value AI is bringing to the society, okay? And third, based on social contract. Is the society accepting AI? And this is gonna take some time for the companies to have this social license. It's not something that I claim, I got the social license. It's what I do, how I develop, how I deploy, and the people feedback about it. This is what will create social life. So I'm going to stop here. I think I've been talking almost for 45 minutes. All right, and we'll open up for Q&As. Moza, if you have some questions, or I will be happy to take some questions from the audience here.
Yeah, we'll give the audience the floor to ask any questions to Dr. Saeed. Anyone?
I hope you find it interesting. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for the question. The question was how AI can be used in this arena of political science, political situations, scenario planning. It's a good question, and I might not have a direct answer to it, but it all depends, like I said, on how we create a use case. We've seen AI now doing many things, many wonderful things, writing, playing music, like I said, drawing, being an artist, drawing many things. And also we see AI in scenario planning in terms of looking into the different scenarios and, predicting which scenario will prevail based on what? Based probably on popularity, based on trends, what's happening, and I like trends because we in Foresight, we speak about trends as well. We speak about signals of change, whether trends are increasing or decreasing or dying out. So you can develop a model, I guess, where you can feed, and of course, based on the data that you have and the trends that you collect, for example, for a particular situation to predict, okay, the result of Russia-Ukraine war, for example. What's going to happen, okay, based on what? You see things are happening on the ground. There are developments that every day we see developments, about this war globally. So you might, ask the question, can AI help us to predict, what's going to happen, what scenarios will prevail? Maybe there are different scenarios. So you start feeding the AI with those signals, those trends, and, with what's happening on the ground. And with so many cases as well. So you want to create, first of all, do you have the data in place? That is the main questions. What data you going to collect? If you don't have the data in place, where you will rely on the data? You will rely on the internet. Internet, there are a lot of things, the good things, bad things, right things, correct, incorrect things. So it really requires, a thoughtful thinking when it comes to how I can use machine learning or AI within the political agenda, within political science. Okay, one area where I can really highlight is, for example, the use of AI for sentiment analysis. Okay, to understand the positives and negatives and how people are feel about certain things. So you can either do a poll, regular traditional poll as a survey to understand how people feel about something, or you can use AI, with the natural language processing to understand the sentiment of society against a particular issue. Okay, and this will tell you, okay, maybe 80% of the people are positive about this particular thing, or this much number of people are negative about particular things. So maybe sentiment analysis is one thing which AI has been, used, but again, we need to make sure that it is unbiased. And when it goes to the internet and collect those data from the internet, you want to look at the data and you start. First of all, you want to play with the data, and what I really learned something really nice in this course, the Open Data Institute, is that first of all, as a data ethicist, you need to be able to tell with some confidence how good is the data. And there is some tools that you will learn during the course of how you can do that. I hope I answered questions. Maybe I didn't have a direct answer, but those are some of the things that you will need to look when you want to develop this for an area of political science, for example. Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Where do you have what? Sorry. Yes. Right, right. So, you gotta make a call first of all. Is the data that you have is good enough, to train the AI models? And how much of data do you have? How diversified is your data? How complete is your data? You're gonna assess your data from a data quality perspective, okay? And if you happen to find out that your data is not good enough to, then, is synthetic data the solution that we can create synthetic data? We see a rise from research that, we see a rise in synthetic data, and many claims, even though one of the cases that I presented earlier for the failures was trained on synthetic data, and the synthetic data gave wrong diagnosis. So you want to make sure that if you're going to really rely on synthetic data to create, because see, you are creating data that is not real. This is one thing. And you're going to train the AI system on this, assuming that, yes, I collected now a diversified data, enough data to cover, gender, sex, to cover racial, the ethnic backgrounds, to cover, let's say, whatever, features that you want your data to represent, you're going to create it synthetically, okay? Is that good enough, to train the AI system? Unfortunately, I cannot assist. There's claims that this area is growing as we see, and people are creating synthetic data to train the AI systems. But you gotta always monitor and observe, and I think this is the most important thing. You need to monitor and observe your AI model as it learns and as it makes prediction, and then see how good are those predictions, and try to understand if those predictions are right or wrong. Sure, please. Microphone. Okay. Yes. Right.
School in this world.
I am not expert in this, and I cannot give you my opinion. As a general observer, I see what's happening. But what was really interesting about this, from at least from for me, from as a technologist, I saw a lot of use of technology into this war, and for the first time, we've seen, you know, again from both sides, from Russia, but mostly from Russian side, but also from Ukraine side, that technology is used in an unimaginable ways, during the war. Whether you're talking about autonomous weapons, autonomous drones, for example, okay, autonomous weapons in terms of relying on AI to detect objects and to shoot with accuracy. So this is one aspect. Um, Other aspect is also involved with the social media. How is this war is playing, and fake news, for example, is another area where we see now AI as. Imagine today a situation where a president of a country, and it's happened with Obama, said something that is he did not say it by himself. It was faked. What's the repercussion and what's the implication of this when you see someone of a high political status saying something that he never said? And now today with the use of AI, with the deep fake, that's what's going to really create problems. So look at the news now, how we can assess whether this news is really right or wrong. There are so many bots there in the social media creating hype and creating fake news and creating bad news for political agenda. This is again one area where, for example, governments wants to use, for example, AI to create a hype on something. And we see whether this is ethical or unethical, that's another question. But there are a lot of uses in AI that we've seen, for this war in many dimensions. And this was really distinguishes, and what's happening now in the future. Look, with that situation where China, Taiwan, the US, the visit of, what's her name? Reminded me, to, yes, Pelosi to Taiwan, and for the sake of what? For this, and for the sake of chips, who's gonna today control the world? Because the world is hungry, factories are stopped, manufacturing are stopped because of the shortage of lack of semiconductor chips that's gonna feed the cars, you name it. So we see now technology is playing more bigger role, and this is when like in 2000, I believe 19, Putin has said this, that the future is going to be the supremacy in the future is going to be depend on who has the best AI. So we see a war, or we see competition going on between China, the US, Russia, and leading countries about this AI, using AI strategically. So the supremacy in the future will be, for the countries who have, developed and adopted AI, to strengthen their position, whether in the military side, or in the government side as well.
Any more questions? Okay, Dr. Saeed, I have a question to wrap our conversation today. What advice would you give us as individuals on a personal level to protect ourselves from the AI risks that you've just mentioned?
Good question. On a personal level, I think the first thing what we need to do is really to be aware and well educated about the risks of AI, and to be aware that, don't believe what the algorithm is telling you, okay? Always question, always be curious. And if you have the chance to understand, for example, how the algorithm made decisions, we went through this beautiful case when I took this course, and it was about, car agency who's renting cars, okay? Put a name and a nationality, and this was in UK, don't want to name the car agency, and the price that was given for this person because his name was Muhammad, he happens to be an Arab, a Muslim, was much higher than the price that was given to John, who's from, different country. Isn't that bias? Or based on what? Classified Muhammad as a high risk? Is Muhammad Egyptian, maybe? Okay. Muslim? Is he a high risk? Or what? How the algorithm decide that the price for Muhammad is going to be this much and the price for John is this much? Based on what? Based on a name, on nationality, or religion? This is what we see. So we gotta be careful. We really gotta be careful, and definitely, AI is gonna make important decisions in our life and gonna be invisible, in our day-to-day work. How it's about us as a society to be aware of this discrimination, is to be aware of algorithmic decisions, and if we get a chance to question, how the algorithm reached a decision, I think, we gotta raise that question. I hope that's the answer, on a personal level, what we can do.
It did. Thank you, Dr. Saeed. On behalf of everyone here today, I would like to thank you for joining us in Trends Conversation today.
It's my
Thank you
pleasure.
so
I want to
much.
thank you, Moza, for moderating this session. Thanks our audience here. And again, thanks to Trends for giving me the opportunity to be with you here today to address such important topic, and all the best. Thanks.